On the afternoon of October 17, 1814, a 22-foot-tall vat of beer exploded in central London. Over 300,000 gallons of fermenting porter burst through the brewery walls. The wave was 15 feet high. It destroyed houses, it flooded basements, and it killed 8 people. This was not a natural disaster. It was not sabotage. It was an industrial accident so absurd, so tragic, and so avoidable that it became one of London's most bizarre catastrophes. People drowned in beer. An Irish wake became a mass grave. And when the brewery was taken to court, the verdict was an act of God. This is the story of the London beer flood. The Horseshoe Brewery stood at the corner of Tottenham Court Road and Great Russell Street in central London. It was owned by Mew and Company, one of the largest breweries in England. By 1814, they were producing over 100,000 barrels of porter each year. Porter was a dark beer, similar to modern stout, popular with the working class. In 1810, the brewery installed a massive wooden fermentation vat. It stood 22 feet tall, it was 30 feet in diameter, and it could hold over 18,000 barrels of beer, or roughly 1 million pints. The vat was held together by 29 massive iron hoops. Each hoop weighed 700 pounds. The sheer size of the vat was a point of pride for the brewery. Visitors would tour the facility just to see it. But the brewery was built in a dangerous location. Directly behind the brewery was a neighborhood called the St Giles Rookery. A rookery was Victorian slang for a slum. St Giles was one of the worst in London, overcrowded, disease-ridden, desperately poor. Hundreds of Irish immigrants lived there in cramped tenement buildings. Many families lived in basement apartments below street level. The houses were poorly constructed, often on the verge of collapse, and separating this slum from the brewery was just a single brick wall. At around 4:30 in the afternoon, on October 17, 1814, a storehouse clerk named George Crick was inspecting the vats. He noticed something wrong. One of the 700-pound iron hoops around the largest vat had slipped. The metal ring had shifted out of position. Crick reported this to his supervisor, but his supervisor was not concerned. The hoop slipped 3 or 4 times a year, he said. It happened regularly. No harm would come of it. Write a note to the maintenance team, Crick was told. They will fix it later. So Crick wrote the note. What no one understood was that the pressure inside the vat was building. The beer was still fermenting. Gas was expanding. The wooden staves were straining. And with one hoop already compromised, the entire structure was vulnerable. Just 1 hour later, at around 5:30 p.m., George Crick heard a noise. It sounded like distant thunder, or a building collapsing. Then the vat exploded. The massive vat burst into splinters. Over 135,000 gallons of beer erupted from the ruptured tank. The force was catastrophic. The exploding vat struck another vat beside it. That one broke open, then another, and another. It was a domino effect. In total, more than 320,000 gallons of fermenting porter beer, over 1 million pints, were released in seconds. The wave of beer was 15 feet high. It smashed through the back wall of the brewery. Bricks rained down onto the street. The brewery roof partially collapsed. And then the tsunami of beer poured into the St Giles Rookery. The force was unimaginable. This was not just liquid. This was hot fermenting beer, under pressure, moving at tremendous speed. It swept through the narrow streets of the slum. There was no drainage. The beer had nowhere to go except into the houses. Windows shattered. Doors burst open. The wave flooded basements within seconds. Residents inside had no warning, no time to escape. The beer simply engulfed them. On New Street, a woman named Mary Banfield was having tea with her 4-year-old daughter Hannah. The wave hit their house. The building collapsed. Both were killed. In a basement on the same street, an Irish wake was being held. A woman named Anne Saville was mourning her 2-year-old son John, who had died the day before. 4 other women were with her, all of them Irish immigrants. They were waiting for their husbands to return from work. The beer flooded the basement. The house collapsed on top of them. All 5 women died instantly. Anne Saville was buried next to the son she had been mourning. Behind the Tavistock Arms pub, a 16-year-old servant girl named Eleanor Cooper was washing pots at an outdoor water pump. When the brewery wall collapsed, bricks rained down on her. She was killed immediately. In total, 8 people died, all of them women and children, all of them poor. The workers inside the brewery survived. 3 were pulled from waist-deep beer. Another was rescued from rubble. But outside in the slum, there was no rescue, just devastation. The streets of St Giles were completely flooded. Beer filled the lanes. It seeped into every basement. The smell was overpowering. The fumes were toxic. Rescue workers dug through rubble, searching for survivors. They called for silence so they could hear anyone trapped beneath the debris. Several people were pulled out alive, but most were not so fortunate. The Morning Post described the scene as an immense mass of ruins. The surrounding desolation presents a most awful and terrific appearance, equal to that which fire or earthquake may be supposed to occasion. There were reports that local residents tried to collect the free beer. Some scooped it into buckets. Others allegedly drank it directly from the street. One account claims a man died days later from alcohol poisoning after drinking too much of the flood beer. But this story appears in no official records. It may be apocryphal. What is certain is that the flood destroyed lives and homes. Families lost everything. The stench of beer lingered for months. Streets remained sticky and foul-smelling long after the liquid had drained away. On October 19, 1814, 2 days after the disaster, a coroner's inquest was held at the St Giles workhouse. George Hodgson, the coroner for Middlesex, oversaw the proceedings. The jury was taken to the scene. They viewed the brewery. They viewed the bodies. George Crick, the clerk who had seen the iron hoop slip, testified. He explained that the hoops failed 3 or 4 times a year. It was normal. No one thought it was dangerous. The landlord of the Tavistock Arms testified. His barmaid had died when the wall collapsed. He described the moment of the disaster, the noise, the chaos. Other witnesses came forward. Survivors, neighbors, brewery workers. The jury deliberated. Their verdict was simple. The 8 victims had died casually, accidentally, and by misfortune. In other words, it was an act of God. No one was responsible. Not the brewery, not the owners, not the supervisors who ignored the warning signs. An act of God. This meant the brewery did not have to pay compensation. The families of the victims received nothing. Those whose homes were destroyed received nothing. The brewery, meanwhile, filed a claim with the government. They had already paid excise tax on the beer. Since the beer was lost, through no fault of their own, they wanted a refund. And they got it. Parliament granted them a waiver. The brewery received over £7,000 in compensation, roughly £400,000 in today's money. The beer was refunded. The victims were not. The London beer flood changed the brewing industry forever. After 1814, breweries across Britain began phasing out large wooden vats. They were replaced with lined concrete vessels. safer, stronger, less prone to catastrophic failure. The Horseshoe Brewery continued operating, but it never fully recovered from the financial and reputational damage. In 1921, the brewery closed. In 1922, it was demolished. Today, the Dominion Theatre stands on the site. If you walk past the corner of Tottenham Court Road and Oxford Street, you are standing where over 300,000 gallons of beer once flooded through London's streets. There is no memorial, no plaque. The disaster has been largely forgotten. But for the families of St Giles, the flood was not an act of God. It was an act of negligence, a preventable tragedy ignored until it was too late. 8 people died, all of them poor, all of them powerless. And in the end, the brewery got its money back. The victims got nothing. The London beer flood is remembered today as a bizarre historical curiosity, a darkly absurd disaster. But it was not absurd to the people who died. It was preventable. The warning signs were ignored. The iron hoop had slipped before. Everyone knew it. No one acted. And when disaster struck, the powerful were protected. The vulnerable were forgotten. This is the legacy of the London beer flood. Not just a wave of beer, but a wave of indifference. 8 lives lost. And the only compensation went to the brewery.